Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Derek Walcott's play, Dream on Monkey Mountain. I'm sorry, I apologize. I once again have a cold, which seems to be the recurring theme of 2025 for me so far, which is not the theme I would have chosen, but there you go. So, Walcott is probably the most famous and successful Caribbean dramatist. And Dream on Monkey Mountain is a widely anthologized, read, studied, probably performed, though I'm not 100% sure of that, play by Walcott. It is, as the title suggests, a dream play, and it is therefore surreal in places, it is repetitive in places, it is full of symbols, full of imagery that carries substantial weight, and yet it is also doing serious political work. So Walcott is from St. Lucia, which became independent in 1979. He was born in 1930, and so he spent a good portion of his life under colonial rule. Walcott was a product of the colonial system, the British colonial system in the Caribbean, and Dream on Monkey Mountain is very much critical of that colonial system. So I want to start by just reading you his note on production. Which talks a bit about the dream quality of Dream on Monkey Mountain. So what Walcott says here in this note on production, the play is a dream, one that exists as much in the given minds of its principal characters as in that of its writer, and as such it is a logical derivative contradictory. Its source is metaphor, and it is best treated as a physical poem with all the subconscious and deliberate borrowings of poetry. Its style should be spare, essential as the details of a dream. The producer can amplify it with spectacle as he chooses, or, as in the original production, switch roles and limit his cast to a dozen or so. He will need dancers, actors, and singers, the same precision and vitality that one has read of in the kabuki. He may add songs more recognizable to his audience once he can keep the raw folk content in them. Scene 11, the healing scene, owes an obvious debt to Spirit, choreographed by the Little Carib Company by Beryl McBurney. So again, it is a dream play. There is a lot of dream elements that make this illogical, not in a way that is not in a sense that is meant to be critical of it. But it follows the logic of a dream, right? Which means that things mean more than they are. Things don't follow naturalistically from incidents that have occurred previously, etc., etc. So the play is primarily about a character named Macaque. He's an old man who's a charcoal burner who has lived his entire adult life up on Monkey Mountain. But he receives a vision from a white apparition that basically that tells him that he is a descendant of kings, a descendant of lions, and that he must return to Africa. He and his friend Mystique set out on this journey. Mystique is not that keen on it, but once he realizes that Macaque's vision and his sort of spiritual power can be used, and Macaque doesn't want to do this, but Mystique does, can be used basically as a sort of like revival meeting con, essentially. So Mystique starts trying to make money off of Macac's emerging reputation as a spiritual leader and a healer. There is one scene where Macac basically faith heals a guy who has been bitten by a snake and has not responded to medicine. Macac holds live coals in one hand, and he places his hand on this sick person, and shortly after that, the guy breaks out in sweat, which means that he's going to sweat out his fever and he's going to survive. So Mystique really capitalizes on this. That whole story of Macac's quest to return to Africa and Mystique's quest to monetize that is framed by Tigre and Suri, who are thieves who are in prison. They've been imprisoned by Corporal Lestrade, who is a mulatto. So he's of mixed race, whereas most of the other characters seem to be just straight African Caribbean. The location of this is a West Indian island, so Walcott doesn't specify where this is. But it's really with Lestrade and, to a lesser extent, Tigre and Suris that the anti-colonial elements of this play become foregrounded. So Lestrade has this very interesting attitude toward the law, right? He's a corporal in the police force, the magistrate service on this island, and quite early in the play, there is this very dehumanizing scene in which Lestrade has arrested Macac on the charge that he has gotten drunk, actually following Mystique being beaten to death for trying to impersonate Macac and get a bunch of money and food from villagers. Anyway, so Macac has gotten drunk, and he has basically just gone into a sort of violent frenzy in this cafe, this bar. And Lestrade arrests him, brings him to the jail, and there's this weird scene where Tigre and Soris pretend to be judges or become judges in the context of the dream logic. And the corporal basically just gives Macac a series of orders, basically just a sort of weird Simon Says type game, but his commentary makes it quite clear that he sees Macac, he sees this person as less than fully human, and this is tied up with the racism and the inequality built into systems of colonialism. Even though Corporal Lestrade is himself of mixed race, we later get this part where it becomes quite clear. So we get this part at the beginning of part 2 of the play. Macac, Tigre, and Soris have escaped from prison. They've been pursued by... oh, no, sorry, not yet. They're still in prison. They do escape and then get pursued by Lestrade. But Tigre says, so Tigre and Soros are trying to get Lestrade to release Macaque. Basically, there's this sort of Christ element to it, right? Where it's, I find no fault in this man, except in this case, it's the other prisoners. And that's even sort of overtly referenced, because at one point, Macaque does mention that Jesus was crucified with two thieves. So there is this sort of strange, this man has done no wrong type element to it that, of course, makes sense in the dream logic. If we assume that this is Macaque's dream. But in making this argument, Tigre says, so what? Is it against the law to be poor? And then the corporal says, here, hold this. He's distributing food. And he turns to Tigre. He says, don't tell me about the law. Once I loved the law. I thought the law was just, universal, a substitute for God. But the law is a whore. She will adjust her price. In some places, the law does not allow you to be black. Not even black, but tinged with black. And Tigre responds, and that is what is eating your soul, that's what's eating out your soul, Lestrade. That is why you're punishing this man. You're punishing your own grandfather. Let him go home. And that this is a really interesting element, because both parts of the play, part 1 and part 2, have excerpt from Jean-Paul Sartre's introduction to Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, which is a post-colonial philosophy book. And one of the things that Fanon talks about in Wretched of the Earth is how after colonial power is broken within a colony, what will emerge in its place is a neo-colonial structure in which a bourgeoisie trained by the education system, trained by the systems of office work, of government organization, etc., of the colonial system, native people who have been brought up in that system will emerge as a new power structure within the liberated colonial nation, post-colonial nation. And because they have been trained to think and act as the British, in this case, or the French, or whatever the colonizing power is, because they've been trained to think and act as the British, they will think and act as the British, but in the name of Lucia, or India, or Nigeria, or Vietnam, or Uganda, or wherever, right? So the systems of colonial power will be maintained by the people, the sort of the lower ranking people in the current colonial system, who are native to that area, but have been brought into the bureaucracy and the administrative structures of the colonial power system. When the top level people in the colonial power system are gone because colonialism ends, the people who will step into those top roles will be the people who previously were in those sort of second tier or third tier ranks. And so Lestrade seems very much to be in this kind of position, right? Where it's, he is attempting to align himself with the English, the British colonial system, so that he can separate himself from his African heritage. But he ends up Um, he ends up joining Macaque and basically becoming one of his followers. But as Tigre and Souris and Lestrade basically fight one another for positions within Macaque's government, we see very much the emergence of this, again, sort of neo-colonial system in which the person trained within the British colonial system imposes the ideology and the mechanisms of colonial violence. For the sake of maintaining and expanding power and control within this newly liberated culture, or this newly liberated nation. And so the structure of colonial authority, power, violence, control, etc., continues, and that sort of undermines Macaque's vision for a liberatory ethos, for a form of freedom in which he can return to Africa, which I think doesn't necessarily require an actual physical return to Africa, but represents some kind of idealized, nostalgic return to a pre-colonial ethos, an ethos of liberation and freedom in contrast to the systems of violence and control under colonial authority.